Have you ever wondered what the world chooses to forget? Not the stories told in textbooks, but the ones hidden in mildew-stained files, buried beneath decades of dust and silence. Tonight, you're not just a listener. You're part of an investigation, one that begins with a single, yellowed letter and ends well. We don't know where it ends yet, but we know where it starts. Moon Asylum, New Hampshire, 1,923 and 51 names. Gone. Elias Finch had buried his wife 6 winters ago. What remained of her after the accident was a closed casket and a lifetime of questions. Since then, grief had turned him into something sharper than a mourner. He became a journalist. The kind who asked the wrong questions. The kind people warned others not to answer. So when a burned-out, rain-soaked envelope was handed to him by a nervous bartender in a forgotten tavern outside Portsmouth, Elias didn't hesitate. "This came from a dead man's coat," the bartender whispered. "He said to give it to someone who writes the truth. That's you, right?" The envelope was watermarked with an unfamiliar Crestan inky silhouette of a half-moon behind barbed iron gates. Inside, a note, shaky rushed handwriting, barely legible, to whoever still remembers Moon. Asylum is not a hospital, it's a cage. They say we are 212, but I count only 161. We are vanishing, one by one. They erase us. Our names, our minds. They call it quiet care. They mean death. Tell the world. I don't have time left. My name is a smudge of inkade to Dr. Alton Weiss. He's the devil here. The letter ended there. No date, no signature. But the final page included a list handwritten, trembling, of 11 names, each marked with a check. The 12th had been halfway crossed out before the pen bled through the paper. Elias Finch. 2 weeks later, Elias stood at the edge of Ashmore Forest, staring up at a rust-colored gate with curled iron bars, bearing the same crescent moon crest, hollow. Moon Asylum. Founded in 1894, shuttered mysteriously in 1923, and left to rot. No demolition records, no survivors interviewed, no final patient logs. Officially, it had been closed due to structural disrepair and patient relocation. Unofficially, no one spoke of it at all, but someone had. And now Elias was standing where 51 people were never seen again. The first thing he noticed was the absence of birdsong. Even the wind seemed to dodge the property. Nature had not reclaimed Hollow Moon. It had rejected it. The second thing was the stench, not rot, not decay. Something older, preserved, bottled, sour-like. Medicine left out too long. He stepped past the twisted gate and through a courtyard paved in uneven cobblestone. The main building loomed, 4 stories, red brick, many windows but all shuttered from the inside. Elias looked down at the file he'd assembled, pieced together from libraries, asylum logs, and census inconsistencies. Opened March 1894. Capacity, 200 patients. Head physician, Dr. Alton Vistaff. 26 last. Recorded population March 1923, 212 known survivors. Relocated after closure, 161 missing, unaccounted for. 51. Some of the missing patients were recorded as transferred, but transferred where? No receiving facility was ever found, no family member ever confirmed a visit. It was like they'd been edited out of history. Elias moved cautiously through the front entrance. The asylum's main lobby was coated in a thick skin of dust, but the structure was intact. A cracked marble floor sprawled out before him, leading to a circular desk with toppled filing cabinets behind it. To the left, a wide hallway labeled Patient Intake. To the right, ward access and a narrow staircase that curved downward into darkness. Behind the desk, a set of locked double doors marked Doctor's Wing. He set up his recording device, hand-cranked wire, spool, and audio needle. Primitive, but it worked. November 5, 1925. Entry 1. Elias Finch reporting from Moon Asylum. Evidence suggests systemic patient disappearance. Primary suspect, Dr. Alton Weiss. Beginning search. He paused, then added, for those listening, if you find this recording, and I've gone missing, do not believe the silence. Keep asking. Elias began with the filing room behind the front desk. He pulled open drawer after drawer. Most patient records were sanitized. Basic admissions, diagnosis codes, dull notations like persistent melancholia or moral turpitude. But every 10th file or so was co-altered. Entries scratched out. Treatment notes redacted with thick lines of ink. Final pages missing. Some names were eerily incomplete, like patient number 176, Ruth A., no surname number 198, Jasper, age, unknown, diagnosis, divine interference, hash, 204 DNR, issued, but no death certificate. Then, in the corner drawer, behind a loose plank, he found something more troubling, a rolled map of the asylum, hand-annotated dot along the basement wing, PHR Immaculate Rooms, Sec, B Room 313, Patient 0. Elias studied the map. Room 313 was not part of any standard floor plan. It was a hidden room, only reachable through the underground storage hall, and that's when he heard it. A sound, not wind, not the settling of old beams. Footsteps, 3 floors, above him. Slow, deliberate, heel to toe. He froze. No, one was supposed to be here. He clicked off his recorder and stepped back from the file cabinet, heart thumping. He counted the steps. 7, 8. Then silence. He scanned the lobby again, empty. Still, he left the filing room cautiously. Gripping the old map like a lifeline, he would start with room 313, the stairs to the basement. Groaned under his weight. Paint flaked like dead skin off the handrail as he descended. The smell changed again, this time to chloroform and salt. The hallway at the bottom was narrow, barely 5 feet wide. Pipes lined the ceiling like intestines. Faded signs pointed to Pharmaceutical Storage Cold Holding Quiet, ROMC. Turned down the quiet room's corridor, his lantern flickering as though the very air resisted light. Then he saw it. Room 313, an unmarked iron door, padlocked shut. No window except the lock was broken, hanging loosely, fresh scratches around it. He reached out hand, opened the door. Inside was nothing, no bed, no furniture, just walls painted black. But on those walls, written over and over, in chalk, in dozens of different handwritings, I am patient 51. I am patient 51. I am patient 51. I am Pa. Elias stumbled backward. Who were they? Who claimed this room? And what did it mean? Before he could investigate further, a sound echoed behind him, a match striking. He turned sharply. In the hallway stood a man in a doctor's coat, half his face obscured in shadow. You're not supposed to be here, the man said. You're early. The man's voice echoed faintly through the narrow corridor, smooth yet emotionless, like someone repeating a phrase they had said many times before. Elias's hand instinctively went to the revolver hidden in his coat pocket, though he didn't draw it yet. He stepped into the hall, lantern trembling in his grip. The figure stood maybe 15 feet away, framed in the flickering orange glow. The coat was unmistakable medical white, though yellowed with age and grime. His face was partially turned, his eyes veiled in shadow. His left sleeve was slightly torn, revealing pale skin beneath it, paler than natural, almost gray-blue. I asked you a question, the man said. You're early. Elias tried to keep his voice steady. Who are you? The man tilted his head, as if confused by the question. Then, slowly, he smiled. It was a crooked, mechanical gesture, entirely without warmth. I was Dr. Weiss's assistant. We expected you, but not yet. The schedule is broken. The quiet hours have been interrupted. Expected me. Elias's fingers curled tighter around the revolver grip. Why? Because you're the one they couldn't erase. He took a step forward. You're the story that remembers itself. The corridor suddenly felt colder. I'm here too. Find out what happened to the patients, Elias said, louder now, voice echoing. 51 of them vanished. Where did they go? They didn't vanish. The man's voice dropped to a whisper. They were rewritten. Elias moved the lantern higher, casting more light onto the assistant's face and stopped breathing. The man had no eyes, not gouged out, not injured, just missing. Smooth skin where sockets should have been, as if his face had been designed wrong. Yet he spoke, moved, even watched. Somehow, you shouldn't be here yet, the man repeated. Elias stepped backward, gun now fully drawn. Stay where you are. The assistant didn't move. Instead, he raised a hand and pointed back. Toward room 313. You opened the room, he said. Now it knows. Then, just as suddenly, he turned and vanished down the hall. Not vanished, as though stepping behind an invisible curtain. One moment, he was there. The next, nothing. Elias stood frozen for several long seconds, heart pounding, eyes flicking between the empty hallway and the black room behind him. The chalk writing still covered the walls, like a chant from a fevered mind. He backed away, quickly retracing his steps toward the main staircase. The cold seemed to follow him. The pipework above groaned as if something massive was crawling through it. By the time he reached the main floor, his breath came in short gasps. He slammed the basement door behind him and pushed a rusted file cabinet against it for good measure. He needed air. He stepped out into the night, leaning against the crumbling brick wall just outside the entrance. The moon was rising, a sickle shape that seemed to hang lower than it should, as if watching him. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. The taste was bitter and grounding. The forest beyond the gates was still silent. No sign of anyone. He pulled out his notebook and jotted a hurried log. November 5th to 9th, 47 p.m., countered a man claiming to be Vice's assistant. No eyes, no normal speech. Claimed they were rewritten. Referenced a schedule, quiet hours, and that I was early. Room 313, covered in repeated message. I am patient 51, possible hallucination. No, too vivid, real. Basement air smelled like chemicals and mold. He tapped the page twice, then closed it. There was more to explore. He hadn't even accessed the doctor's wing yet, and if room 313 was hidden, there could be others. He stepped back inside, this time taking the hallway marked ward access. The air grew heavier as he advanced. The doors to patient rooms were sealed shut with iron latches, some bent or broken. Through one cracked opening, he saw a rusted bed frame and dark stains along the floorboards. There were no sheets, no personal belongings, just a spoon nailed to the wall and a single phrase scratched into the wood floor. Don't let them take your name. As he passed room 206, he noticed something strange. The door was ajar, but inside, the walls had been lined with paper, hundreds of pages, torn from ledgers, books, journals, all pinned or pasted up with dried glue. He stepped inside and began reading. Each page was a different patient entry, but none had names, only numbers, diagnoses, dates of admission, no discharge. Some had handwritten annotations: refuses milk again, screams at white cloth, eyes don't respond to light, still speaks in Latin, removed vocal cords after 3 failed silencing attempts, patient continues, whispering during sleep. Number 144, attempted escape through wall with fingernails, found unconscious, smiling. And beneath all that, scribbled at the very bottom of one page, in ink so faint it was nearly invisible, the treatment isn't to cure, it's to forget. Elias sat down on the edge of the old metal bed, heart drumming. What kind of place had this been? Who had signed off on this? Why were there no records in National Health Archives? As he stood to leave, Something caught his attention. Behind the bed frame, jammed into the slats, was an old cassette cylinder and audio recording cartridge. Standard in some research labs during the early 1900s. He pocketed it. He would need to find a player, maybe in the doctor's offices. As he stepped into the hall again, he heard something from above a piano note. Just one, a single, mournful key pressed. He looked up toward the third floor, where the chapel had once been, according to the floor map. Religious services for the morally ill. Another note rang out, then silence. Elias raised the lantern again and took the staircase upward. Halfway up, the smell changed again, this time to something metallic. Not blood exactly. Like rust and burnt copper. At the top of the stairs was a door marked chapel. The paint had peeled completely, and the wood was swollen from time and damp. He pushed it open slowly. The room beyond had once been beautiful, stained. Glass windows, long shattered, let in pale light through spiderweb cracks. The pews were overturned. A cross still hung at the far end, but something was wrong with it. The figure of Christ had no face, just smooth porcelain where the features had been eerily similar to the assistant's blank eyes. In front of the altar sat an upright piano, keys missing, some blood-stained, and beside it, a tape recorder, plugged into an old wall outlet that shouldn't still be functional. The light on the recorder was blinking. Elias knelt, inserted the cylinder he found, and pressed play. The tape clicked. Then, a voice crackled through, soft and dry. Dr. Viss recording number 86. Patient 51 has begun calling herself by my name. Claims to remember places she was never shown. People she could not have met. We have increased sedative measures, but the others are mimicking her. Something is spreading. Not illness, not thought, identity. Click. We have removed mirrors from wards A and B. Several patients reported seeing the wrong reflection. They say the glass lies now, that something watches from behind it. I do not sleep. I do not think I dream anymore. Click. They don't scream anymore. That's the worst part. They smile when we put the wires on them. When we erase the bad memories, they smile like they've already forgotten what we took. The tape ended with a final, low hum. Elias didn't move. Something had gone terribly wrong here. And it wasn't just negligence. It was willful. He rose, slowly, and turned toward the chapel door. But just before he stepped through, he heard a breath behind him. He turned. The pews were empty, but the piano lid was now closed, and on the keys, written in ash, "Don't remember me." He stepped back, eyes wide, and from somewhere in the walls, just beyond hearing, laughter. Soft, childlike, mocking. He didn't know it yet, but Hollow Moon wasn't done with him. It had only just begun. The laughter faded slowly, like mist curling away from an open window. Elias stood frozen in the chapel doorway, staring at the ash-stained piano keys, the message smudged now by a breeze that shouldn't have reached this far inside. The stale air pressed against his skin, as if the asylum itself were breathing around him. He backed out of the room, careful not to turn his back on the altar. Every instinct told him to leave the building entirely, to burn the place down and walk away. But the cylinder recording still buzzed in his pocket, vibrating with silent weight, and something deeper within him, grief, obsession. Guilt pushed him further into the mystery. Back in the hallway, Elias paused on the staircase landing and took out the map he'd found behind the filing cabinet. A red X had been marked just beyond the doctor's wing, in a part of the structure labeled Observation Vault Level C. There were no connecting hallways drawn between the vault and the rest of the building. Just a note, in the same messy hand, that had labeled Room 313, "Do not enter alone." Elias muttered under his breath, "Too late for that." He descended back to the first floor and approached the double doors labeled Doctor's Wing. The locks had been sheared off recently. The clean breaks on the metal had no signs of age. Someone had been here not long ago. He pushed through into a narrow corridor lined with cracked portraits of physicians. Most of the nameplates had been pried off or vandalized. One remained intact. Dr. Alton Weiss, Chief of Psychiatric Advancement, 1911 to 1923. The face in the frame was gaunt, angular, almost skeletal. A high widow's peak, thin lips, and dark, intelligent eyes that stared too directly into the lens. Elias stared back, as if searching for some trace of humanity in the man behind the whispers. There was none. Past the portraits, the hallway widened into a central research lab. Rusted gurneys lay appended. Glass jars held discolored organs suspended in cloudy fluid. Flies buzzed in clusters above what might once have been a dissecting table. The smell was thick here. Not just rot. Something chemical, like burnt hair and old ether. He passed through, stepping carefully between the shattered instruments and syringes. On the far side of the lab, a heavy iron hatch stood partly open. The words "Observation Vault" were carved roughly above it. Elias hesitated. His lantern flickered, then steadied. He descended into the vault. The steps were narrow, almost vertical. As he reached the bottom, the air turned colder than anywhere else in the asylum. This part of the building had no heat lines, no pipes. Just stone and silence. He reached the final step and found himself in a circular room, 10 feet across. It was entirely walled in mirror glass, an observation chamber, designed for watching patients from behind a one-way screen. In the center of the chamber stood a wooden restraint chair, its leather straps cracked and curling like old snakes. And behind it, on the mirrored walls, dozens of names, scratched into the reflective surface, with what looked like fingernails or wire. Each name was followed by a number. Margaret Hill, 47 Samuel Burke, 19Z. Calder 33 Ruth A. 51 Willius Finch. He stepped back. His name had been etched deliberately recently. The number was missing. A question mark instead, as if whoever wrote it didn't yet know what would become of him. And then, the mirrors shifted. No sound, no warning, just a flicker of movement behind the glass-shadowed figures, passing just beyond the reflective surface. They moved like people, but not quite. Too fluid, too fast. Gone before his eyes could settle, Elias lifted the lantern and pressed it close to the mirror. For a brief moment, he saw his own face, but the reflection smiled when he didn't. He stumbled backward. Then a voice echoed through the vault, not in the room, inside his head. They remembered too much, so we gave them new names, new faces, new selves. "It's better this way," he shouted. "Who's there?" Silence. He scanned the room again. No doors, but the one he entered through. No speakers, no mechanism to broadcast sound. Yet the voice had been real, not imagined. A pressure behind his eyes, like a thought implanted too close to his own. And beneath that, something worse. Agreement. A small part of him, deep and terrified, wanted to believe it was better not to remember. He fled the vault, back in the doctor's wing. He collapsed against a wall and caught his breath. His lungs felt hollow. His heart thundered. He was shaking now, not from fear, but from proximity. He was close to the truth. Too close. He needed answers. Real ones. Records. Names. Evidence. Enough to take to the authorities. Or newspapers. Or anyone who'd listen. On the way back through the doctor's quarters, he passed a heavy wooden door, slightly ajar. A placard beside it read, "Dr. Weiss, Office of Advanced Therapy." Inside, the air was still. The office was untouched compared to the rest of the asylum. A large mahogany desk stood before a floor-to-ceiling window, now caked in moss and grime. On the desk, stacks of sealed envelopes, glass files, and a journal bound in human leather, stiff and grayish, like dried parchment. Elias opened the journal. Inside, the entries were dated from 1919 to 1923. Weiss had chronicled everything in stark, clinical language. March 12th, 1919. First successful rewrite. Patient no longer responds to former identity. We assigned her the name Anna. She smiles often. Sometimes she hums. October 2nd, 1920. Rewrite limit discovered. 3 identities before cerebral collapse. After third identity, memory pathways rupture irreparably. Patient becomes vegetative. January 19th, 1921. Have begun considering staff participation. Volunteers scarce. Coercion will be necessary. June 7th, 1923. 51 subjects prepared for final test. Attempting simultaneous rewrite via induction array. All patients in secured Wing B, if successful, memory will be wiped clean across the entire block. No more dissociation, no more pain, just silence. The final entry had no date, only a line scrawled in shaky ink. The asylum will remember what they cannot. Ilias's hands trembled. He looked up and saw that something had been carved into the office window glass from inside. We are not gone, just Miss Wild. He backed away from the desk, journal in hand. Then his recording device, still in his coat, began to turn on by itself. The reel spun. The wire moved. A voice, not his, crackled through. You're not supposed to take their names with you. He dropped the recorder. From the hallway came the sound of dragging bare feet against linoleum, soft and steady. He drew his revolver. Then came the whisper, clear, childish, inches from his ear. Elias is a lovely name. He spun to fire, but the hallway was empty, only a flickering light bulb swinging back and forth. And beneath it, for the first time, he saw something crawling, a shadow not of a body, but of something mimicking one, elongated, hungry, like memory itself had taken form. It slipped into the wall, like water poured into cracks. Elias stood still. For a long time, he had one plan left, go back to room 313, but this time, he wouldn't go alone. He'd bring the names with him, all of them, and see what happened when they were spoken out loud. He didn't move for some time, crouched behind the peeling records cabinet, watching the shadows lengthen across the room. No footsteps followed, no voice called after him, just silent sand, the steadily dripping pipe from above, echoing like a ticking clock in an abandoned cathedral. Elias rose slowly. The drawer that had slammed shut now hung slightly ajar, its rusted handle trembling as if from some invisible breath. Against his better judgment, he reached inside again. The file folder marked P27 felt warm, almost damp. When he peeled it open, the paper within was stained in places not with ink, but something darker, thicker. He swallowed. The record was brief, too brief. Just 2 entries. Patient name, unknown male, ESD 8 to 10 date, admitted. April 3, 1911, diagnosis, nonverbal reactive seizures. Phantom syndrome, position, transferred to Lower East Hall. August 1912, transferred. No discharge, no family listed, no doctor signature, just a pencil scrawl next to the date of transfer. Keep under LM protocol. That was all. No photographs, no case notes, no signatures of attending physicians. Elias rubbed his forehead. In his years of investigative reporting, he had seen negligence, falsified documents, even doctored evidence, but never entire lives erased like this. As he closed the folder, he noticed something even stranger. On the inside back cover, hidden beneath a glued-on index slip, there was a faint imprint. Someone had written a sentence, then torn the paper away, leaving behind a ghost of graphite. He remembers what they did underground. A sudden noise, scraping on stone sent Elias spinning around, but no one was there. He backed out of the records room, holding the file tightly under his arm. The hallway beyond had grown colder. He could see his breath now, barely illuminated by the flickering overhead bulb. He needed answers, not whispers, in the dark. He returned to the nurse's station. It was still deserted, but the oil lamp he had left burning was gone. Instead, A note had been pinned to the wall using a bone-handled syringe. The paper was yellowed, but fresh ink had soaked through with heavy, rushed strokes. Do not trust the photos. The children were never meant to be seen. M. Who was M? The nurse who had sent the original letter. Elias doubted it now. This handwriting was jagged, erratic, possibly even delirious. And how had it appeared so quickly without him hearing a thing? He stuffed the note into his coat and made his way toward the east wing, guided by the map he'd memorized earlier, according to old blueprints he'd found in the Concord County archives. The lower east hall led to something else, something no longer listed on modern records. The subterranean, a name spoken like a mirth during late-night hushed debates among medical students in the early 1900s. A supposed experimental level, where soundproof chambers and isolation cells were rumored to exist, beneath even the basement floor. He approached a locked iron door at the far end of the east wing corridor. The lock was rusted, but recent shiny new bolts hammered through a much older doorframe. He tapped lightly, then pressed his ear against the metal. Faint breathing. No dash chanting. Low, rhythmic, and unnatural. He stepped back and scanned the doorframe. At the bottom right, near the rotting skirting, was a small ventilation slit, barely wide enough for a hand. He crouched and peered inside. What he saw made him recoil violently. Eyes, at least a dozen of them, unblinking, watching him from complete stillness. The faces they belonged to were half shrouded in darkness, pale, bruised mouths partially open but silent. And then, just before he pulled away, all of them moved their lips in eerie synchrony. He lives beneath the floor. Elias stumbled backward. His spine collided with the wall. His lamp fell, casting strange dancing shadows across the stone. He turned and ran down the hallway, past the defunct hydrotherapy chamber, past the half-collapsed conservatory, all the way back to the front atrium where the old, rusted piano stood beneath the portrait of Dr. Lauren Miles. Only now, someone had moved the piano bench, and on the keys, written in white chalk across the cracked ivory, were the words, "You brought the light. He doesn't like the light." Elias didn't sleep that night. He barricaded the door of the old doctor's office and sat in a chair facing the window, listening to the wind and the occasional scrape of footsteps, or were they rats, beneath the floorboards. He had planned to stay only one day, but morning never came, or, if it did, the light never touched the hollow moon. It stayed gray, muted, and somewhere deep within the ground, something was stirring, or someone. The next day, or what Elias assumed was the next, passed, like a smear of smoke across glass. He couldn't be sure of the time. His watch had stopped at exactly 3:11 a.m., the hour he'd first seen the eyes through the vent. He wound it twice. It wouldn't tick. He hadn't slept. Couldn't. The sounds below the floor had continued all night, scraping, murmuring, a child's cough. Once, he heard something like breathing from the fireplace, though it hadn't been used in decades. He forced himself upright, shaved in a cracked mirror, using cold water and an old straight razor he found in a drawer, labeled Dr. L. Miles, personal. The initials were engraved with a surgeon's precision. By now, Elias had accepted two things. 1. Something had survived beneath Hollow Moon Asylum. 2. It remembered, and if it remembered, he could make it talk. He started by returning to the east wing. This time, he brought tools: his crowbar, a lantern, and an old Polaroid camera, the kind with a burst flash. If whatever was down there hated the light, it might give him an edge. The door to the lower east hall stood quiet. No eyes this time behind the vent. No chanting. Just a keyhole in a door that had no business being locked from the outside. He jammed the crowbar into the frame. The first pull cracked the wood. The second snapped the bolt. On the third, the door gave in with a shriek of metal that echoed like a scream through the hallways behind him. He descended the steps slowly. The smell hit first. Mildew, blood, something chemical. It wasn't a basement, it was a tomb. The walls weren't brick, but blackened stone, curved inward like a drain, funneling something downward. Drips fell from the ceiling like tears. Chains hung from rusted eyelets above every few feet. And the cells. Elias stopped at the first one. Inside sat a child-sized bed. No mattress, just rotted wood slats, and a series of carvings scratched into the wall above it. Names. Dozens of them. All first names. All in a child's handwriting. Some were crossed out. Others repeated 3, 4 times as if the person needed to remember them over and over again. In the far corner of the cell, beneath a pile of shredded cloth, Elias found a sketch. A child's drawing, done in charcoal and blood. It showed the hollow Moon Asylum, but from beneath. It was upside down, with the foundation opening like a mouth and long arms, reaching out to pull screaming figures downward. He didn't want to keep looking, but he had to. Each cell was worse than the last. In one, he found fingernails scratched into the stone. In another, an old phonograph still playing a broken lullaby on loop. The wax cylinder long melted but spinning anyway. But it was the 5th cell that made him freeze. Inside was a photograph. Recent. He picked it up. It showed the nurse who had written him the original letter, Agnes Merrill. She stood in front of the same iron door Elias had broken through, holding a clipboard and wearing a strained smile. But behind her, through the open doorway, a long pale hand rested on the edge of the frame, thin, almost skeletal. The photo had been taken from above, like security footage, but there were no cameras in Hollow Moon. Or were there? Elias turned the photo over. A date had been written in pen, May 2nd, 1996. Transfer successful. Subject P27, still dormant. Elias's stomach twisted. Subject P27 hadn't gone missing in 1912. He had been here all along, held, watched, fed. A sound came from behind him like bones being stirred in a pot. He turned off the lantern, waited. The corridor remained still. Then, the soft sound of water being displaced. A single wet footstep. Then, another. But not ahead, above. He looked up. In the ceiling between 2 stone beams was an air vent. Too narrow for a person. Unless the person had been starved, flattened, or had never been quite human at all. Another step above him. Then a whisper. Low, childlike. "Did you bring the piano, man?" Elias ran. He didn't remember how many steps led back up. He didn't stop to count the names scratched into the walls. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs ached, all the way to the northern wing, the last place he hadn't searched. The chapel. It was long abandoned. The altar had collapsed. Pews had been used for firewood. Above the pulpit, painted in cracked black paint, was a line of Latin text, Et lux in tenebris luce, and the light shines in the darkness. He stepped inside and found, laid neatly across the altar like an offering, a child's straitjacket, so small, too small, and inside something moved, not violently, not suddenly, just a slight twitch, like a breath or a dream, and then a whisper right in his ear. "I remember you." He didn't move. He couldn't. The whisper still hung in the air, warm and damp, against his right ear. The straitjacket on the altar twitched again just once, then settled. Elias swallowed, but his throat was dry. He turned slowly, expecting a face. A child. A man. A monster. Nothing. Just cold stone pews, and the echo of his own shallow breath. "I remember you." He tried to shake it off, tried to convince himself it was a memory, a hallucination fed by fear and decay. But he couldn't, because something had answered him, and not with words alone. It had said, it remembered him, and Elias wasn't sure anymore who had come to whom. He backed away from the altar, careful not to touch the jacket. Something about the way it lay, empty yet alive, reminded him of a serpent. Mid-shed, He turned to leave, but the chapel doors were closed. He hadn't closed them. He reached for the handle and pulled. It didn't budge. He pulled harder until the old iron groaned and rattled. Still nothing. Behind him, something creaked. He didn't want to look, but he did. The straitjacket was now lying flat again, but it had moved. It was closer to the edge of the altar, as if it had inched forward. He took a step back, and suddenly the doors flung open on their own, slamming against the stone walls with a bang so loud it rattled dust from the rafters. He didn't question the opportunity. He ran through. Outside, the hallway looked the same, decayed, damp, indifferent, but felt different. Hollow Moon wasn't just a building anymore. It was watching him. He needed answers. He needed a living witness. He needed to find Nurse Agnes Merrill. The problem was, she'd been listed as missing since 1997, but Elias had a hunch. If someone else had been documenting these disappearances, someone else had to be nearby. Maybe not living at Hollow Moon, but attached to it. So he returned to the main office, where files were kept. Most had been looted, burned, or rotted, but the back filing room was sealed with rusted chains. It took him an hour to cut through with a hacksaw. Inside, he found thousands of patient records, yellowed, fragile, but in the corner, sitting neatly on a shelf to clean to be untouched by time, sat a single manila envelope. His name was on it, Elias Walker, hands shaking. He opened it. Inside were 3 items: a black and white photo of him as a teenager, standing outside his foster home in Illinois, a transcript of his college application essay for psychology school, a handwritten note in red ink that read, "Subject P51 has returned. Reclamation process imminent. Do not obstruct." He felt the floor shift under his feet. Not physically, psychologically. P-51. That was the number in the note on the photo. From earlier, 51 missing patients. Patient 51. Subject 51. Him. He stumbled, back against the wall. What if he hadn't come here by accident? What if he hadn't been drawn to Hollow Moon, but returned? A rustle behind him, then a soft, gurgling moan. He turned. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted in the flickering light of his lantern, barefoot, dressed in white, head tilted at an unnatural angle, like the neck had been broken and never healed. The face was familiar. Agnes Merrill, but older than her last photo. Much older. Her skin was thin, grayish, as though it had been soaked in formaldehyde. Her eyes blinked at uneven intervals, like they had to be reminded. She took a step forward. "Patient 51, she said, voice low and gurgled like water through pipes. "I thought you died in the tunnels." Elias shook his head. How do you know me?" She stepped closer. "You were part of the Harmony trials. You don't remember?" They made sure of it. He stared at her. "The what?" "Harmony trials," she repeated, slower this time. "An experiment, started in 1908, conducted beneath the asylum. You were the last child to survive the pairing mind to mind, soul to soul. One vessel, 2 voices, only one could stay." Elias felt his legs weakening. "What the hell are you talking about?" "They called it the hollowing," she whispered, smiling now. "They took children and paired them with others, the ones that came from beneath, from the well. Only one personality was allowed to thrive. The other, ... was buried." She leaned in. "I remember you screaming when they put the mask on." He staggered back. His hands went to his face unconsciously. No scars, no marks. But deep inside his memory, something stirred. A long, distant image, 2 figures strapped into chairs, facing each other, masks of iron and glass clamped over their heads, screaming. His own voice, and another almost his, but colder. Agnes stepped aside, revealing a stairwell hidden behind a bookcase. "It's time to remember what you left down there. No, you must go." He looked past her. The stairs led downward, into black. "They're waiting," she said, "and they're still hungry." He stood at the top of the stairs, eyes locked on the darkness below. It wasn't just dark, it was thick, like ink, like it would cling to his skin if he stepped inside. Agnes hadn't followed. She was no longer in the office. Whether she had vanished or slipped into some unseen crack in the wall, Elias didn't know. All that remained was her voice, echoing in his skull. "They're still hungry." He lit the last flare from his bag. The flame hissed to life, casting red shadows that danced and pulsed on the crumbling concrete walls. Then he descended, step by step, deeper into Hollow Moon. The air grew colder, heavier, wet with the metallic scent of old blood and mold. Pipes lined the walls, leaking thick droplets that echoed like gunshots in the silence. As he reached the bottom, the stairwell opened into a massive, dome-shaped chamber. The ground was layered with rust-colored grime. To his left stood a rusted operating table. To his right, rows of cages child-sized. Some had restraints, some still had bones. He felt bile rise in his throat. Elias moved toward the far end of the chamber, where a large, circular metal hatch was built into the floor. It had no lock, just a symbol etched into the center, a crescent moon, taut hollow. He knew the well was beneath this hatch, and that whatever was buried had not forgotten him. He placed a hand on the hatch. It was warm. Then a voice from behind. "You were supposed to be the success." He spun around. A man stood there, pale, tall, dressed in a dark suit with a priest's collar, though it was frayed and dirty. One eye was covered by a cracked monocle. The other glowed faintly in the red light. "You led them all to failure," the man continued. "Every pairing after you, ... collapse, madness, death." Elias backed away. "Who are you?" The man stepped closer, shoes leaving no sound on the floor. "Dr. Corman, founder of the Harmony Initiative. I built Hollow Moon." "You're dead." Corman smiled. "Many times." Elias raised the flare like a weapon. "Why me? Why bring me back?" Corman's smile widened. "Because you are not complete. You left half of yourself behind when you ran. But he's still down there. Patient 51, the other you." No, that's not possible. You don't remember the test." "But he does. He's been remembering for both of you." Corman stepped aside and gestured to the hatch. "Go. Reclaim what was lost, or he will come up for you." The flare in Elias's hand flickered, and then the hatch began to breathe, not literally, but with a slow rising pulse beneath his fingers, like a heartbeat trapped beneath iron. He pulled his hand away. "I won't open it." "You already did," Corman said. "When you entered this building, when you chose to remember." A thump shook the hatch from beneath. Then another. Something was rising. No. Elias stumbled back. "Reintegration is necessary," Corman said calmly, "or you will break, just like the others. You've already seen the signs. I am not broken." Another thump. Louder. The metal hatch began to warp outward, bending as if under pressure. Then silence. Elias held his breath. Then came a whisper, soft as breath against skin. "Elias." It was his voice, but not his voice. Then the hatch blew open, the flare died, and the darkness swallowed him whole. There was no falling, no up or down, only the sensation of drowning in thick, invisible tar. Elias couldn't scream. The sound wouldn't come. The darkness had weight, had form. It filled his mouth, pressed against his eyes, slid into his ears. Every memory flickered and warped. His first typewriter, his mother's laugh, the war, gone, returned, twisted, then dash light, a pulse of soft white glow appeared below him. Not fire, not a flare. A room, clean, sterile. The floor was tile, the walls white, shelves lined with labeled jars. Strange organs suspended in thick liquid. One jar held what looked like a child's eye. Another had a miniature heart still beating. Elias stood in the center of it, coughing. The darkness was gone. So was the hatch, the flare, and Corman. The room felt wrong. Too. perfect, like a replica. There was a mirror on the far wall, large, gilded, untouched by dust, and in it his reflection. But the moment he stepped forward, the reflection didn't move. It stayed still. He froze. Then it smiled, a twitch, a grin too wide, as if the face had never worn it before. Then the reflection raised its hand and tapped on the glass from the inside. Tap, 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 tap. Elias stumbled back. No. The reflection leaned forward, as if whispering against the mirror, and Elias heard it in his own mind. I remember everything you forgot. The mirror began to crack spiderweb lines, radiating from the spot where its finger pressed. You ran. You left me here, with the screaming. The lights in the room dimmed. Asterisk, you're not real, Elias gasped. You're a trauma hallucination. No, the reflection said, speaking through his own mouth now. I'm the half you left in the well. A low, wet, gurgling sound echoed through the room. The jars on the shelves began to rattle. The organs inside them twitched. Some began to grow veins. Others moved toward the glass. One jar shattered. A deformed arm flopped out, twitching like a broken spider. Then a second. Then the lights went out. He ran no door, no exit. Just white walls, endless, mirrored white. Behind him, crawling, shifting, whispering, not one voice. 50-1, all saying his name, Elias. He turned sharply only to slam into something soft, a hand. Human, attached to a nurse's uniform, bloodied, familiar. Agnes. She looked straight at him, face pale, but calm. This is the convergence. You don't belong here. Not yet. Elias grabbed her. Get me out. I can't. You brought me here. No. He did. Agnes leaned in. But I can delay it. 1 minute. Maybe less. Enough to breathe. She pressed a vial into his palm. Then she stepped into the darkness, and was gone. Elias opened the vial. A smell alcohol, and mint and something else. Almost floral. Then, without warning, his mind split. He was back. Crumpled on the floor of Dr. Trask's office, the flare dead in his hand, his notebook soaking in a puddle of water and ink. Rain pounded against the cracked window. The underground hatch was sealed again, vain, as though it had never opened. But the room felt different. He could still hear breathing, just beneath the hum of the walls. Faint, rhythmic. He stood up, slow. On the desk, someone had written a single line in charcoal. He is watching now. Elias stared at the words, then turned toward the door, and froze, because someone had slipped his notebook back into his coat pocket. He hadn't done it, and on the first page, in a hand that wasn't his, were 4 words. The rain had stopped, but the air inside the asylum pulsed like a living lung. Every corridor exhaled a faint, sour breath. Elias walked slowly, each step echoing down the tiled halls like a gunshot. The notebook in his pocket burned against his side. Part 9 begins. Below. What did that mean? Was it a threat? A map? A message to himself from himself? He took the eastern stairs down, retracing his steps to the administrative wing. The overhead lights flickered erratically, casting shadows that warped the shapes of things. He passed the rows of offices, the broken files, the fractured portraits of long-dead doctors, with smiles carved to wide. At the very end of the corridor, a door he had never noticed before stood slightly ajar. A rusted placard read, "Patient Records. Ward no ward, null," that hadn't appeared on any map. Not in the nurse's log, not in Agnes's letter. Inside was a long chamber, colder than the rest of the asylum. A generator somewhere below buzzed and spat dim yellow light from a single hanging bulb. Steel. Filing cabinets lined the walls. One sat open. The folder inside bore his name, Finch, Elias, observation, CINDID8. His hands trembled. He opened it. It wasn't a patient file. It was his. Handwriting, pages and pages of observations, details of the asylum's architecture, personal impressions, interviews, room, Descriptions, dates, matched perfectly with the past week, except some entries hadn't happened yet. April 3rd, 1923. Spoke with subject 14. They repeated the phrase, "The mirrors have mouths." Administered tincture. Result, compliant behavior. Note record burning observed at 3:15 a.m. Door 2 Ward Knoll, reopened. April 5th, 1923. Encountered self-construct. Partial possession confirmed. Recommend temporary sedation. Memory sync failing. Elias stepped back, heart pounding. None of this had happened, but a woodbot behind him, a sound paper, tearing, a breeze, cold and sudden. He turned. A mirror had appeared at the far end of the records room, large, covered with dust, but his reflection was crystal clear, and again, it was smiling. It held a clipboard, identical to the one Elias had just read from. It raised a hand slowly. Methodically, Anne's placed a finger to its lips. It opened its mouth, and inside, Elias saw not teeth, but eyes, dozens of them, watching, blinking, studying. He ran out the door, down the hall, back toward the stairwell, but it wasn't the same. The walls were warped, bent, like he was running through the insides of something alive. Each door he passed was now marked with patient numbers, each with a handprint, some bloody, some small, some clawed. He burst into the treatment ward and stopped. Agnes stood there, soaked in rain, but she smiled. "You're almost there," she said, as if greeting an old friend. "Almost where?" "The place they wanted you to forget." Elias approached slowly. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I was one of them." He stared. Agnes stepped closer. Subject 32. "The girl who wrote to you. The one who watched the others disappear. The one who screamed until no sound came out." "No," he whispered. "I died before I could finish the story," she said. "But you're the final page." Behind her, the mirror appeared again, this time taller, reaching from floor to ceiling. He saw himself, inside Itodar, pale, hooked to wires, lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by figures, in surgical coats and ink-black eyes, and above them a symbol he recognized from the doctor's files. Lunar Initiative, Observation Chamber 7. The reflection mouthed words he couldn't hear, but Agnes did. She turned to him, her voice urgent now. "They're pulling you back." "What?" "Your body's waking up. You were never meant to come this far. You were meant to forget, to not remember Hollow Moon." "Then why do I?" "Because the others made sure of it. The 51, they left their pain inside you. The asylum, ... It's a loop, Elias. A memory trap. A place they buried their sins in your mind." He stepped toward the mirror, and this time, the reflection didn't move. It just watched, as if waiting. Agnes reached for his hand. "You have one chance left. One door. After that, sure, there's..." Elias took a deep breath and stepped through the glass. Everything on the other side of the mirror was wrong. The colors were too sharp. The angles of the world bent inward. The hallway he stepped into pulsed like a living artery. Walls lined with surgical lighting that cast no shadows. It smelled like burnt paper and bleached out. There was no sound, not even his own breath. Then a voice, not from outside, from within. "Welcome back, Elias." He turned sharply. Behind him stood a woman in a gray lab coat. No name tag, no eyes, just polished glass lenses embedded in her skull. Her mouth did not move. Yet he heard her. "You've broken the sequence. That was not intended." "Where am I?" he asked. "Inside the origin, where the asylum began, where the minds of the patients were harvested and fed into the mirror system. You are in the core." She reached out a hand. "Return to sedation. Your memories are leaking into the observation field. We cannot contain the echoes." Elias stepped back. "No, I need answers. What happened to the 51 patients? What is Hollow Moon?" She tilted her head. They were never patients. They were recordings. Emotional residues, compiled into you. Test sequence 19. You were the vault, Elias. The asylum was just a shell. Then the walls around them began to dissolve, as if the world itself had grown tired of lying. Through the fading corridor, he saw fragments, a child holding a doll, screaming as the floor melted into teeth, a nurse humming a lullaby as she stitched, mouths closed, Dr. Kearns, or something pretending to be him, whispering Latin into a gramophone while clawing at his own face. And then, he saw himself lying on a slab, in a sterile lab chamber. Wires fed into his temples, eyes darting beneath closed lids, a monitor above his head pulsing steadily. Lunar Initiative Observation Chamber 7 Subject, Elias Fiancy H. Sync Drift, 93.6%. Mental instability. CRITAL immediate extraction recommended. The voice returned, louder. If you continue, your mind will fracture permanently. This is not a threat. It is a clinical certainty. But he didn't stop. He moved toward the slab. He reached out hand, trembling, toward his own sleeping face. And as his fingers brushed the glass, everything shattered. The sound was indescribable, like a cathedral collapsing underwater. Then silence. He woke in a field, alone, drenched in morning light. No asylum, no wires, no glass. Just grass and breeze and the gentle chirping of birds. For a long time, Elias didn't move. Then he stood in his coat pocket. The notebook still rested. He opened it. The first page read, "This journal belongs to Elias Finch. If found, know that I tried." He flipped to the last page. A new line had appeared, written in a hand that was not his. 51 voices, one mind. We remember. We are free. A breath escaped him. Not relief, not fear, something else. He looked up at the sky, cloudless and soft, and whispered, "To the wind, they made me forget." But now he never would again.